Hello and welcome back to The Navel Gaze, a podcast about autosexuality. This week we have Ray Alex Williams as our guest, and we have a lot of fun things that we're excited to talk about today. I'm sure that everyone who's coming to this channel is familiar with Ray's work, but we'll link his YouTube in the information down below. And Ray is a detransitioned male and a self-aware, self-identified autogynephile. And we're going to basically talk about all of these things today. We're going to talk a little bit about detransition politics and identity. And we're going to talk about AGP and some of the lesser known acronyms that cluster around and within AGP, like GAMP, like AGAMP. And we're going to make sure that we define all of these things for all of you so you can follow along. So without further ado, welcome, Ray.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm actually a big fan of this podcast, so I try and catch as many episodes as I can. So
that's very cool, very kind. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like you guys are on the cutting edge of some of this stuff, kind of because it's such a niche field of interest that there's not a lot of people who are actively developing theoretical concepts or advancements within this space, in my opinion.
and I can't really understand why not, right? This is so fascinating, and this is this huge kind of cultural moment we're in around the whole trans thing, and I can't believe there aren't more people who are really diving into the inner psychology that is motivating this. So many people seem to be sort of allergic to it to a degree.
Right. Well, I think people within the trans community are interested. I think they just have so many ideological blinders on that they kind of don't allow themselves to look in a more objective fashion. But I mean, obviously they're going to accuse me of the same exact thing. So it's they'll be like, oh yeah, we're super nerdy about all of our gender stuff, because a lot of these people are autistic and nerdy and interested in these things. They just come at it from a totally different perspective. So that's the sort of interesting thing. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, I think two things, like what you were just saying, Ray. You have a video, something like trans people keep replicating the typology, but in different words. They're not calling it autogynephilia, but they're finding these nerdy gamer, programmer, anime whole, type of trans woman. But they're not willing to look at it through the framework of sexuality, right? Because that's just that's completely off limits to the born this way gender identity politic. And then to what you were saying, Aaron, I think I never processed that, but that's a really good point. There should be the highest volume of research into AGP, trying to support it or trying to challenge it, or at least like you said, we're in this cultural moment where trans is everywhere, for better or for worse. There should be the most research going into not even necessarily typology, but etiology, right? And really understanding the condition, especially if we're trying to look at how we could possibly determine if children or people under 18 might be able to, make these, how likely they are to persist in this identity. It is pretty stunning that there aren't more people who are willing to do this. But I guess, I mean, from the short period of time that I spent in academia before I dropped out of my PhD program, it is super, super, super captured clinical psychology. That's the program that I was in, and that's the departments really that are doing this type of research. And it is super captured. But how are there not enough curious autists or something?
And I totally understand why, the activists aren't looking into this, right? They don't want this drilled into, as Ray's received a lot of the backlash. They're just really terrified of the sexological investigation. But why aren't more people on our side, so to speak, not drilling into this to really understand it. The therapists, etc. It seems like there's just no interest.
Well, I think there's interest, and I think people are doing the psychologizing. They're just bad at it. So, I mean, because their psychology boils down to it's a fetish, and then they like don't ask any further probing questions of like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like they just
Right.
like think that if you just say something is a fetish, that you have therefore explained it, even though the thing you're explaining the phenomenon with is a term that is itself quite mysterious, because we don't know really what fetishes are and how they work in the brain, where they come from, how they develop. Like, are they environmental, genetic, both? What's the interaction? So there's like, just saying it's a fetish, like it's like a thought terminating cliche at this point, in my opinion.
Yeah, and everyone does it. Like, I feel like all sides kind of, well, maybe not the, yeah, I don't know. I feel like even like this, some, the self-aware AGPs kind of do this too. Kind of
Right.
like and maybe it's a bit like self-deprecating, I guess, to an extent when they're doing it. But yeah, everyone on all sides of this tend to kind of boil it down to that. And it's a good point that we don't even really know we know so little about fetishes, really.
Right. And I think on the GC side, they want to just that is like satisfying to them, because their preeminent concern is safeguarding. So it's like, excuse me, they're not interested in the psychology, because they're like, well, why does psychology matter? Like, and also they're like skeptical of sexology as a field, because they think it's run by like, PDF file apologists, and they're kind of skeptical of like these, like, it's like a, lot of it's male dominated, at least the people who come up over and over, like, James Cantor, Michael Bailey, Ray Blanchard, and they just, I don't know. I think, yeah, that the field of sexology has like a bad rep. They think they're like, apologists for deviancy or something.
Well,
yeah, I think that's what the GCs are pushing again. Like, well, they're both the TRA and GC sides. Both are like have this moralistic lens. They're looking at the trans issue through, and I think that's what we're getting to: the dearth of people who are willing to just investigate this without like a moralistic frame of reference.
Yeah. Well, they don't know the other side of sexology, which is just the TRA side of sex. There's plenty of like sexologists who are like, there's plenty of female sexologists out there. I'm not going to say that it rivals the number of males, but they're researching like the mental well-being of non-binary people in same gender relationships. I don't know.
Right.
That exists. there are sexologists doing a lot of like queer research.
Right. And that's like a good point. Like the TRAs are associated with like the left, and the left, historically has been, the side that's all about like kink positivity, sex positivity, like, putting researchers like what's like Masters and Johnson, like the sex researchers, like the Kinsey scale, all these people, so it's like, and if you actually like get trans people, particularly trans women, like outside of these like political contexts where it's on like these public debate stages, you're just talking privately, like most of them are like super into kink, and like will like readily talk about like how influential sexuality is on their life or things. But I think it's just like there's such a reluctance to, or there's such a preeminence of like the pragmatics of politics and how this research will be potentially used to take away like their like what they perceive to be like their rights to healthcare or something like this. So like it just comes down to like politics, I think. But I feel like actually like a lot of trans people are interested in the psychology of sex. They just like have these political concerns that are preeminent.
I think that's like that kind of wraps ContraPoints up, right? Like I think ContraPoints is probably super interested in this stuff, evident by a lot of the content that she used to put out. And maybe I don't know, she seems a little just like standard progressive in the media appearances that she does lately. So I don't know, but she did seem like someone who was just very concerned about how could this be used against us. And of course, this is a pervasive issue, not just in psychology or in trans, but like this is like the Charles Murray debacle, right? I mean, people
Right.
don't want to, they're so afraid of research coming up with things that conclusions that are impolite, right? Or uncomfortable, which is like just this sort of naturalistic fallacy that if we like discover something that exists in the universe, then then it is moral, or then we have to act that way or something like that. Like we don't have any agency to still treat people humanely and
Right.
try.
Right. They think that like, well, I don't know. I think it's just people. I don't know. They like. I think some people just like, in like a genuine way, they're just not very curious about the world. So it's like they are very content to just leave it at politics and rest there. So it's like, um, you know, they're not interested in these questions of like truth, or they don't put much value on like objective knowledge. So it's like whatever the political ramifications of understanding, the origins of transsexuality, then yeah, I don't know. I think that's just where a lot of it is, and yeah, it's just kind of depressing in a way. But I mean, going back to like why people aren't researching this. I mean, it's like look at what's happened with Michael Bailey just trying to look into RGD, which is a very, I mean, that's kind of ideological in a way. Is just sort of understanding like, are there social influences on this stuff? And it's like that basic research question. He's gotten totally hounded by the activists. So it's like, you know, can you imagine being like a grad student like who
Yeah.
wants to study AGP like in some lab, like like you're gonna get, you're not gonna get funding for that or approval for that, like you're going to like a
No, you're not. You're not. And a lot of the advisors, the older people, they just, even if they agree or even if they're curious, that's what I found when I was there. A lot of the people on their way out were more like behind closed doors, I guess, open-minded or concerned with like, and this is back when I was like a TRA and like a crazy progressive activist. And so I was disturbed by like my mentor telling me behind closed doors that he thinks that, kind of the kids are getting, or the patients are starting to control the asylum and stuff like this. And I thought, like, oh, what an outdated, whatever. I had all of my ridiculous beliefs. But they just don't want to put their neck out. They don't want to get hounded, because you'll get hounded. I mean, you'll get hounded for like not having wording like it within your curriculum that is like inclusive to all of the different potential members of your class. I mean, they really are walking on eggshells at all times, and so they don't want to deal with it, and so they're not going to take something like that on. It takes a special personality type. Like Michael Bailey obviously has a special type of personality to be able to withstand that, and maybe to a certain extent get a kick out of it, right? Which I respect, and we need people with that disposition, frankly, who are just concerned, right? Who just, they don't care, right? Go be
I
flying
think all
monkeys.
three of us kind of fit that description.
Yeah, right. To varying degrees. But I think too, you said like the GCs, there's a lot of moralizing, and they see the sexologists as trying to normalize, like you said, pedophilia and things like this. But I think that's a little too simplistic. I think that's sort of the ultras, or maybe even the GCs who wouldn't call themselves ultras, but that I would certainly categorize in that way. But there's another segment of GCs that Aaron and I kind of talk about a lot, which are like our sort of the people that we consider on our side, like our colleagues, who have a lot of respect for Blanchard and Bailey and work with Blanchard and Bailey, you know what I mean, and speak to these people, and yet still demonize and minimize, like demonize AGP and minimize it as being some type of fetish. And that I think really bothers. Those people bother me much more than the ultras, the crazy feminists online who are just like, who think all male sexuality is inherently evil and that females are like doves and you know, wounded animals. But it's the people who I consider smart and thoughtful and who piqued me, you know what I mean, and like who I followed for so long in this movement, who do understand a decent amount about AGP and still use it as this weapon.
Well, I mean, I think it's tricky because the nature of the phenomenon itself manifests in such a wide variety of ways that it just so happens that the varieties of manifestation that have the most impact on the social and political issues that create all the cultural hot button things like bathrooms and, you know, things like this, like locker rooms, you know, all those like that viral thing where that alleged trans woman, I don't know if it's actually a trans woman or cross-dresser or something, but like walked into some like sauna with like a boner or something. This was like a few years back or like 5 years ago or something like this, and there was like a big thing, it got in the news. And
Is this We Spa that you're
yeah,
talking
Yep.
about?
we
Okay.
spot. So it's like
Okay.
in all these examples where like, you know, that come up, or with like these like predators, like the prisons who are like, you know, identifying after the fact of conviction. And you know, so in all these cases, like when you say like it's just a fetish, like you're accounting for the cases that go viral or that present safeguarding concerns. So it's like all the edge cases that, because these trans politics debates, they're all about edge cases. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and the edge cases are the fetishistic dimension of AGP. So it's like that's what people are familiar with. And it's not only what they're familiar with, it's what they care about. Because if you care about the safeguarding stuff, then it's like that's the aspect of the phenomenon you care about. And also, even if you say like, well, there's always like, you know, non-fetishistic manifestations of these like, you know, regular people who have AGP, they're just you're boring transsexuals who have 9-to-5 jobs and, you know, like a family or whatever, and very, 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 very boring, you know. They like I don't know, they just like it's like hard for people to like connect the dots that there's like this underlying thing, because it just doesn't seem like fetish is at the root of both things, but people only care about the one thing. So it's like that's just what they stick with, and they're never interested in going like a level deeper of like, okay, well, what is the thing that can lead to both the fetishistic behavior and the transsexual behavior? And it's like, I don't know, people just don't seem interested in that question. Like,
Yeah, I think you make a good point. All of the really bad behavior that people point to and say, like, look at these fetishists, look at these are the AGPs, right? This is the libs of TikTok people, right? The behavior that they are exhibiting is motivated by their fetishistic AGP or by their AGP, right? In whatever way. But to me, it's like, this is complicated because I don't want to excuse any of that bad behavior because it is bad behavior, but it's society that kicks out the woman in the locker room who's complaining about that naked man coming in with the boner. It's that facility being told that nope, if someone identifies as a woman, you have to let them, and you actually need to kick out the woman who's complaining because she's a bigot. To me, that's the problem. Bad behavior for males is also a problem. We shouldn't allow it, but that's where we should intervene with it, right? Like, because like you said, the normies with families and 9-to-5s are are kind of the same. They're sharing a similar experience, or rather, these things are all coming from the same thing. So it's not AGP. It's not this dirty evil fetish that is inherently the problem. It's, to me, it's the politics of trans women are women that is the problem. It's the unscientific gender identity ideology that we've concretized into law and into policy at private institutions too. That is more of a problem, right, than the fact that some people have an inverted sexuality in which they like to, they might be aroused by themselves, doing womanly things.
Well, I've seen a number of people who make the claim that like the mere fact that AGP involves the fetishization, or one might characterize it this way in some instances, like the like fetishization of womanhood. They say like, well, that is an inherently misogynistic thing to do, to fetishize womanhood. So it's like, so they'll just say like the phenomenon is like intrinsically bad morally because it's inherently misogynistic, because the fetishization of like womanhood is inherently misogynistic. So that's one argument that I've seen, and this kind of also goes into the claim
that's a bad argument.
That's like common with like GCs, which is that AGPs are their like core motivation is like hatred of women, or something like this. Which psychologically I don't buy that. Which is not to say that a lot of AGPs, so far as they're male, don't have male typical opinions about women.
Sure, but it seems like a lot of I think that the people who say that, I'm just like, oh, you don't get it at all. Actually, it's a love for women, for women, for womanliness, for femaleness, and that doesn't always manifest as treating women well, obviously, right? And I think like Blanchard has talked about before, where like a lot of these males can become competitive and bitter, right? And that can sour into what is like sort of clear vitriol against women, but it's coming from jealousy at that point. It's know what I mean? It's envy that's happening there, or a narcissistic wound there. It's not motivated by hatred of women.
It's basically like a sour grapes type of phenomenon. So yeah, but I think we have to be, there's some nuance here, because I think, again, there's I kind of feel like there's like two broad cohorts within AGP. There's kind of like the younger and the older, and like the older cohort, there's sort of this assumption that if you've been like a male and you've been in, the military for 20 years and you're very masculine and macho and otherwise, maybe some machismo in your life. And this is the classic like AGP overcompensation of masculinity to like, deal with these feelings and stuff. So in that sense, I think people want to use those cases of like, well, that person is like, has this, or they're like so masculine that their fetishization of like womanhood must come from like male chauvinism or something. Whereas I think the more like younger crowd is that more like incel to trans pipeline, where it's like they're just like worshiping women, and it's like whereas I think that the like older cohort may not have women quite on like the pedestal to the same degree, but I think it's maybe more objectification of like women versus, and like falling in love with that objectification. Whereas I think maybe it's more like younger crowd is the more like ones who are just like, they just love women and they just want to be around them and have them as their girlfriends and go on wine trips and sleepovers and just I don't know.
Yeah.
You
make an
distinction between
point.
It's not so much age, but culture, right? It's like the culture that these different males were reared in, and how that shapes their view of, yeah. And then all the various kinds of AGP therein, right? It manifests in many many different ways.
Yeah, I mean, this is also, this is sort of like a marketing issue. I was like I was thinking about this the other day when I wrote this essay about like whether AGP is like a paraphilia or in like an orientation. And insofar as like we're trying to like get people to like accept this as like a term, focusing on like the paraphilia side, I think Phil Illy has like the best approach here, because trying to find that like neutral characterization that is like the common denominator between these different cohorts, because that's the thing, is like AGP presents in such a wide variety of like ways that it's like,
Mhm.
and this kind of goes back to the whole question of the typology of like, are there just two types? And it's just like, I mean, there's like, it has to be a very powerful explanatory virtue, or it has to be a huge explanatory payoff, to have the model be that simple, because like the downside of the model is it oversimplifies like a vast amount of like variety within this category. So it's almost like just saying, oh, these people have autogynephilia. It's like when people hear the word autogynephilia, they think of pedophilia, and so I think of
Mhm.
like some sort of weird sexual deviation. So it's like, how can that um deviation be at the root of like all this different behavior? So I think that's what where Phil's concept of like the inverted heterosexuality, like that is, I think, the key concept, that like once you focus on that, like you can sort of like account for all the other variations like downstream of that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think it's also, like, it gets back to sort of what you were saying before, which is, like, what do people mean when they say paraphilia or fetish, right? Because there are people, AGPs, who are not engaging in at least the payoff, the sexual gratification, right? Because it's so distressing to them. They're not masturbating. Um, they're obviously having there's a huge psychological impact, especially if they're choosing to transition and things like this. So it's obviously affecting them, but it's not compulsively sexual in that way, right? And yet it is still autogynephilia. And so I agree with you. I think like um I think conceptualizing it as a sexuality is helpful. I think that's like one of the definitions of paraphilia anyway, is an atypical sexuality. Um, it's more neutral, and I think it's more honest. And I actually think it would be not that hard for people to accept that what the typology is two kinds of sexualities that manifest in trans woman identity, because before gender identity ideology, I feel like a common understanding of what trans was basically super gender nonconforming gay people. It was like, oh, like that. It wasn't surprising, sort of like the public figures or whatever. This is like before Caitlyn Jenner and stuff like that, obviously. But I feel like I don't know. Maybe you guys would disagree with this. I'd be curious to hear your input. But I feel like that's like how normal people naturally understood trans, was like, these are the people who are so gender nonconforming, which is normally correlates with being gay, and so it like makes sense that they're just sort of going all the way, right? And that it's going to be easier for them to live as the opposite. And so I think it was like already kind of understood that this was a gay thing. Now people today want to make it like it's only a gay thing. Like this is just only happening to it's gay kids and vulnerable gay adults who are being trans, which is obviously not the case. But I think like it wouldn't be that hard for people to understand that it's about sexuality, or that it's related to sexuality. Um, because I kind of think that's the frame. It was related to sexuality already before we were told to believe that it's not related to anything, and everyone could just be born, by luck of the draw with a soul that doesn't match their body. I feel like before that there was an understanding that this is the really gender nonconforming people who are typically the gay people in society. Now that wasn't obviously true for the actual demographic of like people transitioning, because obviously AGPs have made up a large portion of the demographic for a while. Do you guys think I'm off base with that people kind of previously associated trans as being just really gender nonconforming gay?
Actually, about like normie public
Yeah,
opinion. Yeah,
like
definitely.
pre 2012, I would
Yeah,
say.
yeah. I think that was always the assumption, and I just find it incredible that so many, despite all the evidence to the contrary, still seem to think that that's the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what normies would think. I feel like most normies just wouldn't even have a developed opinion. It's just like it's not even
Right.
something they like think about. But going back to this question of like conceiving of transsexuality as ultimately rooted in sexuality is like, why is that so hard for people to accept? I think the biggest hurdle I see with people is like people challenge the sexuality comes first and identity comes later, because
Mm-hmm.
they'll say like, well, in my life, like, all this stuff started in childhood prior to puberty. So it's like, you know, how can you say I have or this all has roots in a paraphilia when I had these thoughts and feelings prior to even having a sexual awakening at all. So it's like I think that's one of the biggest theoretical challenge. And Anne Lawrence has like a section in her book like on this, addressing it with some interesting case studies. But I think that is sort of like the key, or one of the key theoretical challenges for the theory, is how to account
Mm-hmm.
for the pre-pubertal manifestation. But I think once you start going down that route, you start thinking about like, well, what is a sexual orientation, like, and
Mm-hmm.
how that thing, whatever that is, like redirects and orients like a lot of behavior. I think people miss like what is the term orientation. They just think like um, it's like so simple for the brain to be like oriented towards like a certain type of stimulus, which is like like from like a cognitive perspective, that's like very challenging to like abstract across all stimuli to pick out this one thing that you want to like be attracted to. So like I don't know. So I think people just like don't appreciate that. But yeah, it's like what is a sexual orientation? And once you start thinking about this in terms of like redirects all your life, it's not that hard to think that there would be like like if like sexuality is like the most important thing for the evolutionary process to evolve, like it's not going to like develop that um ex nihilo at 12 years old. It's not like you're gonna have like a pre-sexual organism and then at puberty their sexuality just like completely springs into existence out of thin air. Like obviously there has to be like normal heterosexual behavior has to like presumably build up and develop and elaborate until it can do its thing. And the same thing with homosexuality, any other sexuality. Like so to me it's not that crazy, but people they just have very simplistic ideas of how the brain works.
Yeah. Yeah, we totally accept that pre-gay is a thing, basically, right? We accept that there are behaviors that might be indicative of someone's long-term sexual orientation that can present themselves before sexual maturity.
Right.
So why
And
would it be different for regular heterosexuality, right? It's like then actually, if we acknowledge that we're seeing something like sort of different in the pre-homosexuals, then like everything we're seeing among everyone else is like the heterosexual version of that. Like it's sorry, I'm going to go on a slight tangent, but like homosexuals sex signal with their clothing all the time, like aesthetically all the time. And that's just okay. But AGPs can't do that, right? It's woman face. It's perversion. It's fetishistic. But like my wife can dressed like a man, right? Like cross dress, essentially, obviously trying to signal that she is not, that she doesn't want male attention, well, she doesn't want anyone's attention because she's so happily married to me, but you know what I mean, right? Like, gay people sexually signal. When I first came out, I remember like wanting to look gay because I wanted to be able to attract women, right? Like, how can I make myself appeal to women who are into women? So we allow everyone else and obviously heterosexual people are sex signaling, right? We allow everyone else to do it. But somehow it's like evil and particularly perverted when and then auto heterosexual sex signals.
Right.
It's all because they're going back to that whole fetish, the as we said, the thought terminating cliche of a fetish. It explains both why they can't accept the signs in children, because again, thought terminating, children don't have fetishes, and so therefore it can't be evident in a child. And also with the whole sex signaling thing, it's oh, you're projecting, or you're showing off your fetish to unconsenting people, which again is even more ridiculous if you think about it, because autosexuals are sex signaling to ourselves, not to it's even less, I think, of a consensual, or consent issue, if you kind of understand. And they just don't want to understand it beyond the fetish.
Right. And I think with the child psychology thing, like the like core emotion is there in childhood, which is the crush, the like romantic crush. Like children have crushes all the time. Like a little straight, like a little boy is going to grow up to a hetero man. Like he can have like little crushes on girls. And I've heard, gay people say that pre-puberty they had, crushes on the same sex as well. I don't know if, I've definitely heard people say that. So, and at least with autosexuality, like that sort of like emotion, like that I mean that's all you need. That's just like that seed, and you can generate like so much of like the autogonophilic experience just from that core emotion. You just sort of like invert it upon itself, and then everything starts like going crazy. And that it's where you get like all the the envy, desire thing too. So yeah, I feel like all the stuff is there, and like puberty is just like wiring up the genitals to that machinery. But like the like autosexuality is like it's like a cognitive thing. It's like a brain thing, and it's like that machinery has to have precedence. Otherwise, like there's going to be nothing to work with once you actually hit puberty.
I feel like there needs to be more research. I say this without having looked into what research exists, if any. So maybe there is, but I feel like it would be helpful to have more research into autosexuality, because I find that like even just referring to autogynephilia as autosexuality is just like a little less stigmatizing, right? And it is an autosexual experience. And I say this because like I believe myself I understand my sexuality as being autosexual in lots of ways. Maybe that means nothing, right? Like, because this is not a diagnosis, this is not something that has been heavily researched, but I don't know how else to describe it other than like what's going to get me sexually aroused is like if I look good. Like that it's I'm thinking about myself. And this was going back to like as a young, like my sexual awakening was like basically recording my pictures and videos of myself to like watch back and engage with sexually. And it's like that that seems autosexual. And I've described too, like I almost feel like part of my attraction to men was and is very much like how womanly I feel in comparison.
So meta attraction.
Yeah, basically. Right, exactly. Yeah, so I think it would be helpful to understand autosexuality, because I
Yeah.
don't think it's just autogynephilia.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is the key missing theoretical piece that we don't understand. It's like this inversion mechanism. We're always talking about like inverted heterosexuality. Well, okay, well, what does it mean to be inverted? Like,
Yeah.
okay, like you invert. Well, inversion is like just a spatial metaphor. It just means something that was previously oriented outwards is now oriented inwards. Well, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, okay, so you're cognitively processing information about yourself in a way where you used to do that cognitive processing about the external world or some object, and now you're applying the same process to yourself. Well, like cognitively, what is that logic? And I think that the like more I've been thinking about it, the more I'm sort of trying to like break it down into like its cognitive operations of like what is this like this erotic target inversion thing. And it's like I think, you know, if if sexuality cognitively is like we have like beliefs about the world and we have desires, you know, so my desire is to have sex and I have a belief that, you know, or and you have goals. So you have beliefs and you have desires and you have goals. Well, if your goal is to have sex with, you know, some being out there and you like, um, I think where the inversion happens is like there's some sort of logical error or something where like um the like object of attraction gets replaced with like self somehow. Somehow like the logical goal or belief or there's some like
Mm-hmm.
miswiring somewhere where like some logical operator like flips from like internal to outside or some like belief about like object like or like object is not me and then like you like believe object is me or something like that like I'm so I'm not sure if you said you were in clinical psychology, right?
Yeah.
Like, I was reading Steven Pinker's book How the Mind Works recently, and he talks about
Okay.
like mentalese, and this like cognitive computational approach of like computation. Like imagine you're building like a artificially intelligent AGP. Like, what would that like computer system look like in terms of its like
Mhm.
beliefs, desires, and goals, like beliefs, goal states, and stuff like that.
Mhm.
That's what I was sort of thinking about
No,
recently.
that was really interesting the way that you broke that down, and that makes a lot of sense. And then what I was thinking of is like, but then there must be like, this can truly be, I think, part of someone's sexuality. There does seem to be some truth to this idea that there's sort of like a spectrum. There's like sort of autosexuality, or is it part of? Are they parallel? I don't exactly know, right? So there's this autosexuality that we're talking about, and there's allosexuality, which is, you know, attraction to other people. And for some people, they're having this experience that you were just saying, right, where it's like reading it wrong. It's like seeing object and reading it as self, right? Um, or, you know, something to that effect. But also like seeing object and being attracted to object now, and by object I'm talking about like another person right now, right? um
Right.
and it does seem like for some people their sexuality is sort of subsumed by, I guess, their like their allosexuality. It isn't sort of much lesser, and for other people they seem to have real, you know, allosexuality. um and it seems to, yeah, move somewhere on a spectrum. What do you think about that? Do you think they're part of one spectrum, or are these like separate tracks with different intensity levels?
Mm. So the question like is like the autosexuality and the allosexuality like two parallel tracks, or there's just like
Are they ends of a spectrum?
ends of spectrum? I don't know. I mean, I think like I mean ultimately it depends on like what model is like more explanatory or like more useful. I mean,
Right.
I can see like the value in like both models, but in my experience, in like my own personal life and also with some other AGPs I've talked to, like there does seem to be this like classic scenario of like they're like opponent processing that, or it's like a conflict. It's like when you focus on the allo, the AGP recedes. When you focus on
Mhm.
the AGP, the allo recedes. But it's almost, but you can't go full blore. You can't fully satisfy the AGP and fully satisfy the allo. And it's that's the essential curse of like the AGP from like a romantic perspective, is like you can never have the best of both worlds. You can never fully satisfy your and the only exception is like, you know, if you found someone who let's say you're like a hetero man, and or like a non-transitioned hetero man with like AGP. Identifying as a man, you're dating women. Like the only way you're gonna find like your sexuality is like if you can like kind of cross dress in like the bedroom essentially, or you should
Mhm.
have some role fulfillment or whatever. But it's like, and I think this is one of the motivations of why people transition, is because they want to have sex as their like ideal sex. It's just like, you know, like a gay guy, like let's say like a closeted gay guy in like a straight marriage. Like his ideal is he wants to have sex with men. Well, the like AGP, they want to have sex while they're feminized.
Mhm.
Or have something involving that. You know, if you're like anatomic, then you're gonna want, you know, sex with a vagina or something, or
Mhm.
whatever your iteration. But trying to just like repress it by just going full bore, like I'm gonna be like the masculine hetero male role, like it almost always leads to this like opponent processing conflict where you have to kind
Mhm.
of choose. You either have to find the unicorn who's like cool with your kink, or you have to or you have to like transition, or you have to just repress and never have a fully satisfying sex life until you die, which
Right. I don't think it's a unicorn, or like I don't think that the type of person who would be like open to an AGP or AAP partner or lover is any more rare than
Than the
AGP
condition
and AAP
itself.
itself. Exactly. And like I think there's
well, that's rare then. So
right. True. I guess
like,
true.
you know, so
But
that
true.
I
I
mean
guess yeah.
that's inevitably a smaller portion of the overall dating pool.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And the other thing that's hard is like, okay, so you want to find this compatible partner. Well, it's hard to just put in your profile online or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
hey, like here are all my kinks. You better be, you know, don't waste my time. I don't want to waste yours. Like, you know, it's not easy. But
No,
I mean,
yeah.
I don't by like unicorn. I mean, yeah, there's like lots of people, but it's just like finding them.
They'll be harder
It's
to
like,
find. No, that's true.
yeah,
That's true. But I
yeah,
think like what you said to me sounds like a really good outcome for a lot of people. A lot of people who probably don't need to be medicalizing or living a life where they're in constant paranoia and anxiety of being misgendered, who could live a life where they get to play the cross sex role in the bedroom and in other ways. You know what I mean? Like in other ways throughout their life where they're going to be gender non-conforming, whether that's wearing makeup, you know, or liking to cross dress. That seems like the healthiest outcome for the people for whom that could be satisfactory. I don't think it like that's what I see my relationship as with my wife, basically, is like a hack. Like she's just we're just now finally, and it wasn't on anyone's dating apps, right? This took us being together and then being married to really get to the core of like what's going on psychologically and sexually. But yeah, it's like my wife just gets to be the man without having to like insist that the whole world calls her a man.
right.
And she would like to be masculinized, but she feels like she lived 30 some odd years without doing it, and there are potential medical complications, and like it always like exists there as a literal option, but like she's not interested in it right now, when at one point she was really interested in it. And again, she didn't get over it. She still wishes her body did not look the way that it does. That hasn't changed at all. But it feels like a bit of a hack. Yeah, she's just able to, like, she can totally be the man with me, you know? And because she's a woman, societally too, like I was saying before, she can just cross dress and she can just like do masculine hobbies and whatever. And it's just, that's fine. It's just fine. It's all good. And that's,
Right.
I think, an outcome that I would like for more people, because I think it's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, I think the like curse of autosexuality is like, even in these hacky situations, like it's always going to be a compromise to
Yeah.
some degree or another. But on the flip side, even if you have totally normal heterosexuality, like it's always a compromise to have your sexuality be perfectly satisfied, because how many
Absolutely.
how many heterosexual men, like, their ideal sexuality is to have sex every day, and
Mm-hmm.
like the reality of their life is they will never be sexually satisfied, because you know if they can even find a partner, it's most likely
Mm-hmm.
that partner will not want to do that. So I think like sexual frustration is sort of it's just like the nature of reality to some extent, of like
It's the nature of a civilized society. I think that's a really
Yeah.
great insight. That's a
right,
great insight, that is also how just everyone lives. That's how straight men live too. They're
right,
not if they're going to be monogamous, they're not going to be entirely sexually satisfied. I
yeah,
think that's just like period, pretty
totally.
much, with few exceptions.
And then as far as like, why don't more AGP men sort of like take this, well, just like live it out in the bedroom sort of, thing. Well, I think the problem with that is like the shame aspect, because
Mm-hmm.
like it's one thing to have the secret thing in the bedroom, but like it's like easy to keep it totally secretive if you're like, you want to keep it from like your family. Like that's like the classic, like the secretive married cross dresser. You have a strong incentive to like keep it hidden, because you don't want to ruin your family. Um, but let's say you are single and you're doing this. Well, when you start engaging in this, like the escalation process happens, and you sort of like just get to the point where like you want to take it to that next step, where like you bring it into the public world. Like you want to paint your nails. Well, you don't want to paint your nails and then have to go into work and like remove your nail polish the next day. So the next step is to like paint your nails and then leave the nail polish on. Okay, well now you're um, in the world as like a guy wearing nail polish. And now you have to deal with the shame of all this, and this for like straight males, like something as simple as wearing nail polish. Like it's psychologically, it's like a mind fuck for a lot of guys, because there's so many social norms against expressing yourself like that.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not even AGP, even if it's like
Right.
you're like a musician, or you're like a goth, or artistic or something. Like for those guys, it's like maybe easy because they're more like creative or artistic in their personality. But like for your regular hetero straight AGP guy, something simple like nail polish is like, it's like a psychological
Mm-hmm.
mountain to climb. So dealing with that like shame of like trying to bring it into the public world, because it's like, yeah, like trying to find that balance of like escalation versus like the tolerance, because you have to think like, if you do the exact same thing every time you like have a fun time or whatever, a autosexual fun time, you'll build up tolerance to that stimulus. So you have to keep escalating to get higher and higher pleasure that you're seeking. So this is where the escalation pipeline comes from, because you just need more and more and more to get the same thrill. So then people like get to this point where it's like, well, I don't want to be like known as the public transvestite. I'd rather be known as like the public trans woman, because that's a more
Mm-hmm.
socially acceptable narrative script. And so off you go into transition.
So we need to bring back the transvestites. We need to bring back transvesticism into fashion.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
I think it's starting to happen a little bit with like the femboy movement. People like Fenster, even though Fenster did get pressured to take on like a gender fluid, non-binary trans identity, in my opinion, he still seems very much at home with like the femboy crossdresser type label. I think he's just.
I agree with you, but he said himself, he was like, what he said, he made some type of joke of like, yeah, like what happens to femboy, whatever. It's like they all become trans women, right? Like the femboys won't exist in 5 years because they're all going to transition.
I like actually watched like a follow up where he like responded to that, and he actually clarified. And I thought it was nice. What he meant was just that like femboy is like it's like a aesthetic and a culture. So it's like he just thinks like the reason why femboys aren't going to be around in 4 years is because in 4 years the culture will be different, and like, but he didn't have an alternative term like crossdresser, gender non-conforming. They just don't really have the same like cultural cachet as like femboy. But you can't be a 45-year-old femboy. And so like femboys by
the point about age
and like aesthetic are like
yeah.
It's like a younger, and I'm the same thing. It's like, you know, like, yeah, like I like the femboy, you know, but like I'm like pushing 40, so it's like it's weird to call myself like a boy, but like,
right.
you know, I but like, yeah, like crossdresser, that's like seems outdated. Like gender non-conforming man is just like doesn't roll off the tongue very well. There's not like a lot of good like, you know, but like femboy is great, but like, yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah. It does make you wonder, like, why do we need a name for it?
Why do humans need names for anything? I mean, this is just part of the human.
Right. I guess that's true. No, that's
and I think part of it's the same thing with like the rise of like detransitioner as an identity label.
Yeah.
That's becoming its own form of social contagion, its own form of identity, which is fine. And this is how human civilization evolves and progresses. But it's like you have to have these options in the possibility space to like make sense of them. So it's like, you know, and like someone's pushing the like boundaries of like being on the vanguard of these identity developments. But yeah, I think I don't know where I was going with that. Oh yeah.
Well, no, but that's a good segue though, because say more about that, because obviously it's detransitioner has become a social identity, certainly with a certain amount of cachet. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, because you came onto the scene or started making content publicly when you started your detransition. And so you sort of like came onto the scene as ostensibly a detransitioner, but you are very squarely in the self-aware AGP space and not in the detransition space. And I would be curious, like, how much of that is intentional. I wonder I wonder what you think about it, and maybe I'll probe with more questions, because I have lots of hypotheses or things that I think might be going on, not necessarily with you, but like in the psychology of people who are attracted to that social identity of detransitioner. So tell me a little bit about your experience.
I mean, I'm kind of in the detransitioner space. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that.
Okay. Maybe it's also just because like the detransition space is kind of young too, and so like,
all right, yeah.
Maybe that's part of it. But yeah, I mean,
if you're talking about like
your shtick is not like detransition justice. That's not your lane.
Right. Well, I mean, I did just recently provide testimony to the Noe versus Parson, Missouri case for the state of Missouri. So to some extent, I'm like, I'm like involved, but yeah, you're right. It's not like my like main thing, and I think partly because I don't feel like well, one, it's not as interesting to me. So like
Hmm.
yeah, I kind of just go based on my interest because I like feel like I say more interesting things when I talk about the things I'm interested in versus
Hmm.
things that are merely what's hot on social media or whatever. But um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is like I never had any surgeries, so I never felt like particularly like botched by the gender medicine world
Hmm.
or whatever. And I think a lot of the people you see in the like detransitioner space are more th- they like have a much stronger like victim mentality because they have been victimized by the brutality of the system. They're like the people who had the often like very bad outcome. So it's like understandable to me.
Hmm.
And then yeah, I mean everyone. I mean this is like the accusation of like, oh, they're all just grifters or whatever. But it's like everyone wants to find meaning and purpose and have a source of income that's not a soul sucking like job.
Hmm.
So it's like I mean people are getting involved in like activism to make sense of their lives and fighting for what they believe in. I mean that's what everyone does. So
Yeah, I think it's much more seeking a group, seeking comfort, trying to make sense of their lives than a grift.
right.
But that's my
Yeah.
impression of it.
Well, I mean, the thing about a grift is like, I mean, I hate that term so much because like,
Hmm.
I mean, you have every left tuber on the planet on like bread tube or whatever. I mean, they're all trying to monetize their politics. So it's like, I mean, that's just like the nature of the internet is like the whole internet is monetized and like
Hmm.
the number one job that everyone wants in this economy is to be an influencer and a content creator. So it's like, are we surprised here? Like when you
Right.
put incentives in a society, you're gonna get people responding to those incentives. So t- to me, like this whole like accusation of like grift is like it's sort
Well,
of like telling, yeah, I don't know.
I think so. A grift is a specific type of that. It typically means the person doesn't actually genuinely believe what it is they're professing, and
Hmm.
so it's like
Right.
it's not yeah, it's just not honest content creation
Right. And
essentially.
there's some people out there, like Ollie London, I would classify in the grifter category, who's clearly just following
I don't know
the
what the hell he believes.
he's
Yeah.
just clearly following the like the whims of opportunity as they may
Yeah.
blow. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do think that one thing I've noticed, given that a lot of the detransitioner cohort is autistic because the transitioning cohort is autistic. Um, I see a lot of black and white thinking when it comes to certain things. Sort of like just a very and yeah, you have the black and white thinking, and then you have a social media environment that rewards extreme takes, and and you have like you have an incentive to just kind of be polarizing. And I think these people sometimes want like and like another thing about autism is sometimes that they're like moralistic idealizers, in my opinion. Like they sort of like think about morality and justice in these very abstract ideal ways, and they want ideal solutions rather than pragmatic real world things that require a lot of nuance and context. And so I feel like when we're talking about like, for example, gatekeeping and like healthcare, there's just a desire to just like ban everything for even for like adults. It's just like
Hmm.
you just get these like really extreme like positions, and it's just like
Hmm.
there's rarely a willingness to like dive into the messy pragmatics of like how the healthcare system actually works and um Yeah, I don't know. That's sort of my opinion. But I like try not to like friendly fire too much because it's like my people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't weigh in that much on some of this stuff.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I have seen that it's like there's different things going on for different people. There's like some detransitioners who are still like who had maybe negative surgical outcomes or something like that, or they just realize or decide that they're not trans anymore. But they're still TRAs, you know, they're very much like, I will not have my story be used, you know, to be weaponized against this or that. Um, and then there's people I think who try to carry more of that middle position, which is like, this was not right for me. It might not be right for some number of people who are doing this. I wasn't fully, you know, made aware of what the implications are, but yeah, but I don't think this should be taken away from adults. And I think those people receive the most backlash. No one's really happy with that because it's too much of a compromise for both sides, and everything has become so polarized. And this is just sort of everything in our culture right now is just so extremely polarized, um, and it's to the detriment of everybody. There, what are your feelings about who should be able to access transition related medical intervention and on whose dime?
Yeah, the dime aspect is important.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of those issues where like you can state your ideal position and it like makes sense, but then you can start generating counterexamples to that ideal position very quickly, which is and then just like ruins the whole thing. Um, Philosophically, I think the only thing that like makes sense, like from a pure logical perspective, is like libertarianism for body modification as rational adults. But you have to break it down. Okay, so adult. Okay, well, what does that mean? 18?
Mhm.
That's just an arbitrary legal thing that has no moral significance. Okay, well, what's the morally significant thing that defines an adult? Well, clearly it's like your ability to make rational decisions. Okay, well, what's that? Like, are we going to well, we like don't even know neuroscientifically like the mechanisms of that. We say things like, well, the brain doesn't finish maturing to 25, but it's like people mature at different rates. So it's like, are we just going to assume 25, or assume 18, or assume 22, and just like take some average, um, or are we going to actually like investigate on a case by case basis and like somehow try and measure someone's like rational cognitive faculties? Well, we don't know how to measure that. We have no way to measure
Mhm.
that. We can sort of use doctors' clinical judgment of like just, you know, assessing whether they seem psychotic, or, you know, asking them questions. Can they answer questions about reality? So we can like measure all that. Okay, well, what does it mean to make a rational decision about gender medicine? Well, you have to know all the risks and the benefits. Okay, well,
Mhm.
do you need therapy to do that? Or, you know, can you just show up in a gender clinic, like read the informed consent documents, sign them, and the doctor just assumes that you're in like good cognitive capability to do that, even though we know like, well, maybe you're artistic, maybe you just got influenced by watching too much TikTok. But in the pragmatic reality is like no doctor has the time to sit there with every patient and do a thorough analysis. I mean, doctors, they're lucky if they get 5 minutes with a patient,
Mhm.
particularly in like primary care facilities where, you know, it's like fee for service. Doctors get paid per transaction, so they're incentivized to run through as many patients per day as possible. Very little, you know, we can't even do basic preventative care in this
Mhm.
country. So to think we're going to be able to do systematic, comprehensive mental health care evaluations to determine the like cognitive faculties of like these people to decide ideally whether they're like, no, that's never going to happen.
Mhm.
So we have to compromise and like make a cutoff that just say like, okay, well, as a society, we're just going to say 18. 18, you can make decisions for yourself medically as an adult, and therefore, you can walk down to the plastic surgery shop and get yourself a boob job. That carries risks, because
I
that's the
think,
thing.
yeah, some of the competency questions go away if you frame it as body modification, like you said, as opposed to treatment for some type of, I guess, mental illness, although now you're not really allowed to say that either. But if it's supposed to be life-saving treatment, that is where you're not being entirely honest. People don't actually know what they're signing up for.
Correct. And the
Yeah.
only logical reason why gender medicine is connected to life-saving medical necessary healthcare is because of the connection to the suicide
Right.
risk. But if you take that away, okay, well, now we're just treating psychological distress. Well, it's the same, the person going to the plastic surgeon for their nose job or whatever, they're feeling psychological distress about their nose. So, okay, well, now we have to distinguish between different types of psychological distress. It's like the psychological distress felt by the gender dysphoric trans person, like that's special, but the psychological distress experienced by the natal female who wants a nose job because her
The
nose is
Jewish
too big.
girl with the big nose.
Yeah, right. It's like that distress, that's not important. Well, the only thing that logically distinguishes them is like apparently in the trans case, if you don't get your psychological distress met, you're going to kill yourself. But that is, there's no basis in reality for that statement. So like logically, the only conclusion I can come to is like we just got to treat this like elective cosmetic procedures.
Yeah.
But plastic surgeons, they have an obligation to not do nose jobs on someone who has body dysmorphia about their nose. It's like, is this your fifth botched nose job? Like, well, maybe you shouldn't get your nose job. So you still need some sort of psychological health evaluation. So in reality, in my opinion, there's no good clean answer, and the only real solution is like the entire healthcare system needs to improve, and the most we can do is protect the children. And just change like the culture. I feel like trying to solve like bad gender medicine at the level of like clinical gatekeeping policies. We need to change the culture and stop making trans so like culturally attractive. In my opinion, that's like the more favorite thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's sort of like what I was saying earlier. A lot of this, I think, comes down to the culture of trans, and not so much the reality, I guess. I don't know. I know we're over an hour right now. Aaron, how are you feeling? There's a bunch of juicy stuff that we haven't even touched yet, which means we could start that now, or we could plan for a part 2.
No, let's get into it. Let's go into yeah.
Okay. So then I'm just going to take a hard turn basically from here. So we want to talk about some of the stuff that is confusing even for people who fancy themselves sexology nerds, which is GAMP and sort of AGAMP. And I think there's a lot of interesting conversations to be had. One, GAMP is sort of
well, first we should say it's an acronym. So gynoandromophile, if I pronounced that correctly, and then autogyno. Yeah. Anyway.
Yes. Right. And so GAMP sort of answers the age-old question of like, is he gay if he's into trans women, if he's into, let's say pre-op trans women? And the answer is no. But he's probably GAMP, right? That's the most likely motivator for someone to be attracted to someone who is feminized but still has a penis. And I think there's been some like interesting research looking at the sort of like arousal patterns, I guess, of straight males, of GAMPs, and of gay males. And the pattern is more similar to straight males. And from what
but not identical. That is also a key.
Not identical. Correct. Yeah, it's a totally separate line, basically.
It's like higher arousal for the she-male body, but more arousal for the female body than the androphilic gay males.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I guess like a question for you is GAMP inherently related to AGP, basically, or is it there doesn't have to be an auto part there doesn't have to be an inversion for the GAMP, because I've seen guys, from as far as I can tell, who are GAMP but have no desire to feminize themselves and don't strike me as AGP in any of those other ways.
I mean, to some extent, this question has already been empirically answered because they measured your GAMP score, then they gave you the core AGP scale, and it was only like 60% of GAMPs had elevated rates on the core AGP scale. So it's like that's 40% of GAMPs don't have elevated rates of like autosexuality, at least as measured by the AGP scale. Whether like on the whether on some like spectrum view, it's all related. Maybe that's true, but there definitely seems to be some GAMPs who are low on that spectrum of autosexuality. And to me, this would be the guys who like I don't know. It's just like they're into blondes or something. Like I don't know. I don't know. They're like into
Mm-hmm.
It's just like something like they're into, but they're not like cross dressing on their own, and they just I don't know. And there's also like chaser psychology is like interesting to me because there's a lot of chasers who they relate to men better in a way, like from like a personality perspective. So they like trans women because they like relate to them in a way. So that's like interesting, but that's like the minority. Most scams, it's just like porn thing. Basically, they just like what category of porn, and I think a lot of that particular GAMP, so say like, well, because GAMP can't just be like the inverse of AGP, because AGP is like 3% of the population, but trans porn is like one of the most popular categories. That's like, you know, millions of men, far more than the AGP population are watching this stuff. But I don't think they're all secretly repressing their like AGP. I think it's just the nature of pornography itself, insofar as like the escalation of sensitization and habituation to the sexual stimulus requires further novelty in the stimuli, and so you just sort of seek out over time. You just seek out weirder and weirder things, and so it's like, I think the like stumbling upon the trans thing. It's like this novel stimulus, and I think it's taboo and it's novel, and that drives interest in of itself. I don't think you need some grand theory to explain that.
So you're kind of with the feminists on this, in that autogynephilia can be generated via porn usage. Is that what you're saying, or am I?
No, I'd say the GAMP, like pure GAMP, can be, I think, generated just from
okay. So you don't think I'm open to that being possible, but I guess like Aaron and I talked to a bunch of people who are interested in this stuff in like a group chat. And there seems to be, from some other people, like there would just be a strong disgust response for some people.
Why?
Maybe a lot of people.
I mean, think about it. You have you're gynophilic, and you're attracted to the feminine form. Here's someone with a feminine form, with one small exception. But
they would argue it's a big exception.
Well, no, because a lot of men, they're not turned off by the aesthetics of the penis. They're turned off by everything that surrounds it, like
interesting
hair, muscles. But I mean, think about almost 100% of every porn that every man has ever watched his entire life involves staring at a penis. So it's like, and also when you're masturbating, you're looking at your own penis. So it's like, for most men, in my opinion, like the penis is like, it's gender neutral. It's just like this. It's like a dildo. It's like a gender neutral penetrative pleasuring thing. So it's like, what's gay is when two masculine men are having sex because it's the masculinity. But it's very easy for, I think, men to disambiguate the penis from the rest of the body. And so, yeah, I would say that it's like, yeah, very, very possible for GAMP to develop without the underlying autosexual disposition, which is the only thing that makes sense. The only thing that makes sense of why, because you would have to therefore think that if trans porn, because like it's literally like top 5 categories on the internet, and it's like 100% of men are looking at porn. So it's like, if it's in the top 5 or top 3 or whatever, then it's like you're talking about like 80% of men you're claiming are like secretly AGP. Like there's no evidence for that, in my opinion. Like,
but you said that there was a study that showed that 60% of the GAMPs were AGP. So are 60% of the men who are watching the she-male porn, are they repressing AGP, or
it sounds like we need to do a study. I don't know. I mean,
There's a
it's
lot
like
of interesting questions.
It's like possible. I'm not like, not opposed to it. But I think we have to be like, I'm a big proponent of the idea that because you have to think, like, a lot, like 99% of this GAMP stuff is generated by exposure to internet pornography. This is not something.
How do you know that?
Because you're not walking around seeing transsexual women in your day-to-day life. The exposure is on the internet. So it's like how would you develop a paraphilic interest?
But weren't there chasers before the internet?
There was far fewer of them, and I think that would be the more.
Well, there were far fewer trans women.
Yeah.
I hear you. I'm open to what you're saying. I'm open to what you're saying. I watched an interview. I can't remember the guy's name or his wife's name. It was a trigonometry interview with this like comedian. I don't know. Either of you guys watch this, maybe you don't know what I'm talking about. Again, I don't know his name, so it's not helpful at all. But he's married to this trans woman, and she was there in the interview too. And he's like very open. He seems like just such a guy's guy. He's like a comedian. He's like a very blue collar type of guy, and he's got this like beautiful blonde, passing, pre-op trans woman wife. And he says very, plainly, like I don't know, I'm not straight, like I'm obviously not straight. He's like, I'm not quite gay either. His real preference is for trans women, right? And he didn't use the word GAMP. I don't know that he would like know anything about that. And so I believe that I'm open to the idea that GAMP can be totally separate from AGP, but I would still think that there's some type of disposition happening there, I guess, and not just purely
but why? Like, because presumably
evolutionarily, why?
The like supposed shared disposition is the disposition for inversion. But what evidence is there for inversion in that pure GAMP case? There's no inversion. It's just pure attraction. It's just the attraction is to a configuration of body that they're super attracted to. Why?
Why is the assumed predisposition for GAMP the inversion? You said it's for both.
No,
why is that?
Go ahead, Aaron.
Oh no, you go ahead. Explain.
I was going to say, because you're saying that you're saying that the GAMPs, or the like question under debate is like whether all GAMP has a underlying autosexual disposition that gives rise to the GAMP. And then I said something that negated that, but I can't remember what I said.
No, yeah, and I guess I'm agreeing that I don't think that it needs to be autosexual in nature.
Well, then what would it be that unites them? Like, Otherwise, we just have like a case of
Well,
like
paraphilia is clustering.
like
Could that just be what unites them?
Um,
Because here's the next thing, right? Is like, so there's a lot of trans women are GAMP. There's a lot of, and maybe some trans men. I mean, we had Ashley on our show, and she's like a total chaser.
yeah.
And
Well, that's the 60%. I mean, that's that. I mean, there's a strong overlap,
right,
but I'm just
right.
saying like it's not a perfect overlap. And
Was
the
that
question is like,
60%? Sorry, in that specific study that you're referencing, because I've never seen it, were they trans women or were these all like what was the demographic of males that were surveyed?
these are I think just regular males, non-trans.
So that's interesting, because then there's like even more sort of like that a man who's not identifying as trans and maybe is not even identifying as AGP, but who scores high on an AGP scale and you know, as GAMP, is different from even like the trans women and stuff who are in certain ways, right? I mean,
Why?
Right.
Is it just the decision to
psychologically,
transition or not?
I guess.
Well,
I
maybe
guess,
culturally,
or
it
just
depends on-
in how much that it's influenced them. I guess maybe in just in terms of like intensity and severity.
Well, you think about it, like we would expect to see a similar pattern, because I think with this purported inversion mechanism, whatever it is, it's I think what Kevin Sue's work has shown is that it's generalizable across sexual phenomena. So there seems to be a mechanism such that the like brain is attracted to something, and then there's an additional step of logic that says I want
I
to
should
be
be that
like
thing.
I want to be like the thing I'm attracted to. So
Mhm.
you're attracted to amputees. You want to be an amputee. You're attracted to, I don't know, obese people. You want to be obese. I don't know if that's actually a thing. Maybe it is.
Right.
But you know, you're attracted to children. You want to be a child. The list goes on. So like in the GAMP and AGAMP, you're attracted to she-males. You want to be a she-male. The logic is
Right.
the exact same, but it's like, okay, well, can that attraction to the she-male exist independently of the inversion mechanism that says to be the thing you want to be? And I think you can just like there's some guys, because I mean, I yeah, so that would be my
Because
case.
all of the other things that you laid out, you can be attracted to those things without wanting to be those things. They're
Right.
pedophiles and they're autopedophiles.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if you just extrapolate the pattern, like we should expect a similar, like at least conceptually. But yeah, like in like reality, maybe these pure GAMP cases have like slightly elevated disposition of this inversion, because I think you kind of can think about this all probabilistically in spectrum. It's like whatever
Right.
model, you know, you can have like discrete models or more continuous models, and you know the brain is like this. You know, we're just using all these metaphors about the brain, like, you know, fluid dynamics, and you know, like with like sexology, we use this metaphor of inversion, even though no one really knows what that means. But like,
Well, I really want to kind of dig into this a little bit, because what you just said, you're talking about being attracted to she-males and therefore wanting to be, or to use more politically correct language, being attracted to trans women and therefore wanting to be a trans woman. We recently had Annie on, who is an autogynephile, but so I'm starting to think that there are two distinct presentations of AGP, and how much is this a spectrum really, now that I'm thinking about it, in say your case versus a case like Annie's, right? So she's very much not attracted to trans women and very much attracted to just women. So she's
attracted to trans women.
Well, okay, if they completely pass and are post-operative,
or if they plan to be post-operative.
Okay,
but that's not a real like genuine trend. Like,
well, no. I hear what you're saying, but it is in so I get what you're saying, Ray. Right? Like, well, okay. So I have a few things that my mind is now thinking. It is insofar as like what she's saying, and I believe her, is like she wants nothing to do with the other person's penis. So someone who's planning to have surgery could still be a suitable partner because sex is not a top priority in a relationship, like intercourse or anything like that. So I believe that. And also, like, there seems to be people who have a preference for someone who looks like a sexual orientation toward people who look like natal females who are trans and post-op. So just knowing that they were previously male is like part of it. So it seems like that thoughts can be. Who is one of the sexologists was talking about this? Does anyone know what the hell I'm talking about right now?
No,
Damn
I
it.
don't.
Okay.
No.
All right, then I'll have to pause there and try to see what I'm actually referencing here. But that seems to be like a preference that some men have, is for trans women who.
That seems very rare, very, 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 very rare.
I'll concede that. I'll concede that easily. Sure, yeah.
That's probably like a kink in its own right or something. It's like a fascination with like surgery or something would be my
interesting.
It's like a sort of like surgical like fetish or something.
So what I was saying though, Ray, is like, so for you aren't, your thing isn't about being a woman. It is about being a trans woman, correct? And you are attracted.
Well, specifically a preoperative or like non-operative.
Right, and that's a really crucial thing there. Is attraction to that kind of that hybrid thing specifically, and being one as well, not to literally being a female, like somebody like Annie. She's saying things like that, I think, Tali, just to basically keep her dating pool as broad as conceivably possible, but her primary attraction is to being an actual female and to being with actual females. That is the height of her desire. Whereas for someone like you, Ray, it's not. The height is the hybrid, is the
right. I mean, I would say I fall in the in that study where like the like GAMPs like showed like the highest like arousal towards like the gynoendomorphophile. Like that'd probably be me in terms of like that's like peak, in terms of like yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's but it's also like like a dominant natal female with I'm sharing my personal.
It's okay. I told you guys that I made like homemade porn earlier in this conversation, so I think
it's like
part of it here.
So like a female with like a strap on, taking on the like dominant role, like that is just in the whether one is like more conceptually it's all in the same category. It's more like what like does this person allow me to express my sexuality? And it's like, and there's degrees of that, so it's like there's some women who they might be okay with a little bit of pegging, but it's like would they want you to like full blown cross dress? It's like so it's like
right.
There's degrees of like all this. I don't know how I got on this topic.
it almost sounds like you're describing like relational sexuality. So you're saying I'm attracted to this person based on the role they would potentially fulfill in a sexual dynamic.
Yeah. The attraction is to someone who would allow me to not feel obligated to live up to the traditional heterosexual masculine role, which is more important, I think, than almost anything else for a lot of AGPs. Is like they don't want to have to play the role of the masculine top.
Yeah.
They don't like the presupposition that comes into relationships, because it's that playing that role. And it's like, even if like they might be fine topping in like a quote unquote lesbian relationship, it's all about how it's conceptualized and like how and like what are the normative expectations of like who takes the initiative, who doesn't take the initiative, who's expected to perform. Like, are you expected to perform? Like, are you expected to like be a man and keep it, rock hard for an hour or whatever? Or is there expectation to like, you know, not live up to those performance
Mhm.
demands? And I think it's all that stuff that I think like drives a lot of AGP sexuality. So it's not strictly like which body am I like maximally turned on. It's like,
I totally agree, and I think you just explained the AAP butch lesbian phenomenon perfectly, because that's exactly what I think happens if this is real in the females. If there is this AAP butch lesbian cohort, that makes a ton of sense in the exact, you know, corollary of what you just said, which is they really don't want to be in that receptive female. They don't want to be the female in the relationship sexually, emotionally, right? They don't want to be viewed that way. They don't want to have those expectations, and it's less about the particular body of the person that they're with than it is
and more about the role that they're
how they're going
playing
to get to
within.
embody in the relationship sexually and otherwise.
right. And I actually have a personal anecdote about this. So I know like a lot of people say like, if you're or people like the GC world will say like, if you're a true lesbian, like there's no way you would ever possibly find a male, a NATO male. You would never ever get in a relationship with a NATO male. But like when I was trans identified, I got engaged to this lesbian who's a NATO female. She had been out as gay since like high school. So like came out at like 16, had only ever dated females.
Mm-hmm.
I met her in her 30s. So she'd been like out as like a gold star lesbian for like 20 years, but she dated me as a trans woman. She'd never been with the penis before, but I now I know that she was likely AAP because she was attracted to like the she-male form and had like, I don't know, it was like weird. There's something autosexual going on in that like relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this whole, and that's going back to this like philosophically trying to say like pure homosexuals are like attracted to the same sex, but the meta attracted like autosexuals are like, I mean, it's almost like from the behavioral perspective, like looking at their life history, it's like these, like you couldn't tell this person apart from like
Mm-hmm.
a true homosexual. Otherwise, we just define it based on who have you had sex with, like in terms of your body. But it's like, I don't know, it's almost like psychologically, it's like that's less interesting to me than the messy reality of all this meta attraction stuff. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing here. It's like, wait,
yeah,
how many of these gays are autos?
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and
yeah.
what is true homosexuality, especially when we're talking about females? It seems like in both males and females, a lot of homosexual behavior is a number of different things, or rather, like Aaron and I are sort of trying to hypothesize there's different ideologies, and we think that one ideology for homosexuality is autoheterosexuality or some type of autosexuality going on. But yeah, for females especially, I mean, I came on. I very confidently called myself a lesbian until I got into Twitter arguments with people who just like try to shame me and tell me that I'm actually bisexual. And I'm like, again, I don't care. And when I was calling myself a lesbian, it wasn't because I've been with men. I didn't feel like I was like hiding in a closet. There was always something that didn't quite work. I would get the ick with boyfriends, and when I started dating women, it felt 100% better, and it was like a clear preference, and it felt like a choice, basically one that I would be much happier to choose to be with women. But I don't think it's that simple. And I think a lot of people online who are saying that are like really projecting and lying about their own shit too. And I say, like, even just watching these like Jubilee videos and stuff, like there was one a couple of years ago where they had like gays and lesbians, and like the butchest looking butch there, she was like in her 50s or something. Like she was like the one who admitted to being like, like I've been attracted to some men before, like I had an experience. And it's like, it's obviously not that fucking simple.
Right. Yeah. And some of these philosophically, like trying to like figure out like an individual's true sexuality, par- par- particularly if it's someone that's not yourself. That's like from like an epistemological perspective, it is a very challenging thing. For example,
Yeah.
like Brianna Wu. Like so whenever we are developing pattern recognition, we can sort of like our like AGP radar goes off between the like HSTS versus AGP. Everything in my pattern recognition system screams to me that Brianna Wu falls into like the AGP stereotype in terms of,
Yeah.
her mannerisms, the nerdiness, the autism, the computer science, the programming, all that stuff, like the male typical interest. It falls into that pattern perfectly. But listen to her life story. She says she's more on the HSTS side of things. She's been attracted to men from boys from like a young age. And it's like, is this a difference without a difference? Like theoretically, it makes sense. But the thing about autogynephilia, I feel like the problem with it is like it only really works if you like acknowledge it in like your own life. And we can sort of speculate that like Brianna Wu is this or that, meta your attraction to males is like meta attraction, not homo attraction. And it's like, okay, well, like at the end of the day, she's been married to a guy for 15 years. So it's like, like
Totally.
like theoretically, like it's all interesting, but like applying this stuff to actual individual people, unless it's your own self and you can think about your own life history and like say, yes, this makes sense in my life. Like, I think it's like very tempting to start. And I'm super guilty of this myself because we have these pattern recognition and it screams
Yeah.
to us like, this is, and it's like, I question is like, is my pattern recognition infallible? Because the
Right.
unconscious is pretty damn good at these sorts of discrimination tasks, but and the brain knows the phenomenon more than we're capable of describing it in articulation. So we understand it at a gut level more than we can ever put into words. So like I kind of trust my brain on this one, but like
Yeah.
but in terms of actual discourse day to day with people, you can't. It just doesn't get you anywhere because people won't buy it if you try and tell them who they are.
Yeah.
I think there's we got to keep in mind that there's a massive incentive to not be entirely honest in this particular um, discussion. And so yeah, I definitely rely more on my pattern recognition skills than on what people profess about their own sexuality.
Guilty. I didn't say that.
Well, and this is, but by the way, yeah, and people like to throw that, and for good reason, right? They'll say like, you just decide, right? You're a hammer and everything's a nail. And what are you just going based off vibes? And it's like, well, yes, sort of. I am sort of going based off of vibes. But like, this is also like how you are trained as a therapist to make assessments is you do not just take what the person says at face value. You compare what the person says about themselves to what you're observing about them, to what their parents say about them, to what their friends say about them, to what their hospital records show. Like you have to look for all of this different collateral information because humans are complicated and they could have a bunch of reasons to hide the truth or not even consciously, right? To they've absorbed lies about themselves and how that they we the retconning experience. Everyone kind of does this. It's not just the AGPs who do this.
Yeah, and it's not even guilty. It's like innocent. We just sort of
it's
like
totally innocent. Yeah, it's how we
yeah,
make sense of our stories.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
studying the psychology of like memory and like narrative identity formation. It's like, yeah, it's like deeply fascinating, but also like you just realize that people are just walking around like making up stories about themselves.
it's a little
Like,
depressing. Yeah,
yeah,
right, and not knowing that they're doing that.
right.
Right.
And then
That's the key point.
and like politically speaking, and also like socially, as far as like the social lubricant that keeps the whole system working, is like you're not supposed to challenge people's narratives in like polite society.
Mhm.
Particularly when they're about like, you know, these core things like, you know, your sexuality or whatever.
But yet we kind of do question people's sexuality all the time.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that is culturally acceptable to us if we think someone's like in the closet, right? Or like repressing in some way. People kind of do draw attention to that. But trans is sort of sacred in this way where you're not allowed to do that. Because the people whose sexuality that we're trying to hypothesize about and speculate on are identifying as trans. So they're like sort of off limits now. You can't make any commentary.
Well, this goes back to, you know, full circle of the whole conversation. Like, why aren't people interested in ideology? It's because the ideology has framed things in the language of identity and human rights, so that these are like these intrinsic, you know, personal identity characteristics, like your age, your sex, your nationality, your ethnicity, or whatever, is like, you know, rather than thinking of these things as like complicated psychological processes that develop over time in response to like complex, you know, genetic and environmental, you know, causes. Like they just sort of like, yeah, we're just born with these things and they're just like somehow attached to our souls, and we derive human rights from them, and we have subjective access to it somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to just another comment on the sort of Brianna Wu train. And Brianna, if you're watching, I hope you don't take any of this offensively. No one here thinks that AGP is a bad thing at all. But yeah, I'm with you. And this is what I've been saying. I think the label of pseudo bisexuality probably accurately described the experience of some cohort of AGPs. And it seems like that's obvious in the way that they describe it, especially some of them describing sort of feeling like disgust and shame after sexual encounters with men. But I think that like really does a disservice to people understanding themselves within the typology. And I don't think it's true to a lot of people's subjective experience, even the ones who are like who are heterosexual for the most part. Like I've been shocked to learn in the last few months of heterosexual trans women who've found themselves developing crushes on males in their life. And that was like, they're not trying to believe that they're actually a gay man. Like they're not trying to, you know, pretend to be HSTS or anything, but they're actually developing sexual and romantic attraction to males, authentically and maybe even surprisingly. And so I think like, I don't know if there have been studies into the sexual arousal patterns of AGPs with allohomosexuality, because like, who knows what it would show up. Like you said, she's been married for 15 years. And what I always say to the people who say like, oh, well, that's, you know, that's a meta attraction. It's not really the same as, you know, like you said, Ray, that's not the same as the homosexuality, the androphilia that other males have. And it's like, do we know that? Like, for all we know, someone, a trans woman, an AGP trans woman who, whose metasexuality is her predominant allosexuality, would show preference, you know, sexual arousal preference for men. I guess it gets more complicated because most of the trans women we'd be talking about in this case would be post-op. So less sexual arousal testing that we could do. But yeah, I think like I believe her that she loves her husband and doesn't want to be with women. Like I believe that. I think that's true. And I still think she's AGP. And I think like it kind of goes back to like, I think they found the pseudo bisexual AGPs, and then they found the 15% of HSTS who are cross-dressers. And it's like, well, no, maybe those were the androphilic AGPs. And maybe there is something like 15-20% of AGPs who will develop a predominant, persistent, romantic, and sexual attraction for males.
Well, I guess the question is like,
it's kind of, sorry, I'll finish this thought really quickly. It kind of goes back to what you were saying about how your sexuality is caught up in how you can present sexually, right? And like that makes sense that's part of what these people's experience is too, right? They want to be the woman in the sexual role, in the romantic role, in the emotional role, and so they're going to choose the person who they can do that with
Right.
most
I
successfully.
I do worry that this Blanchardian thing is not going to be able to turn into a mature science. I don't think it's quite at the level of mature science, mostly because almost all psychology is not a mature science, because it's the struggles with the issue of measurement. So let's say we have
Mhm.
this 15% of the androphilic males who have a history of arousal at cross-dressing.
Mhm.
The hypothesis is that, well, actually they're AGP. Okay, well, how would we test that hypothesis? Like, how would we measure that they are truly AGP and not just um, merely present, or they're now showing like as if they're HSTS, but actually they're really AGP. Well, what can we do to measure that true AGP essence underlying the presentation of HSTS? Well, the only tool we have is the core AGP scale, um, and that scale is just like, are you aroused at the history of like cross-dressing? But like it would be circular reasoning to like assume that like that's definitive, because you could just say like, well, maybe there's a theoretically unknown example of, you know, homosexual males engaging in cross-dressing arousal. Like, how do we know that no gay male has ever had a boner putting on panties? Like, we don't know
Mhm.
that. Like, maybe that's happened. And like, you know, so like, how do we measure this? And so
Mhm.
until we resolve these like core like measurement issues, without like circularly defining it so that AGP just is defined as being the thing, such that if you've had the history of cross-dressing, but then it means that by definition, not empirical research. So you see what I'm trying to get at?
Yes, insofar as this is the problem with all of psychological research.
Yeah. Yep. I mean,
And
that's
it is a
it.
problem. It is a problem. Yeah, it is a real problem.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, this is why when like I was in grad school, I was a behaviorist, because psychology is a soft science, and
Right.
the only way to make psychology is a hard science is to have measurement. The only thing you can actually measure is the physical world. So
That's the CBT model to a certain extent, is like
yeah,
that every intervention should be based on whatever data you're collecting, and it's supposed to be partially sort of observable, but part of that data is also going to be self-report measures. A ton of that data ends up being self-report measures about subjective emotional states. Um,
right.
Psychology is fraught.
Yeah. I mean, this is why like I mean, I'm like, I mean, now we're getting to like pure philosophy. This is why I'm like not a physicalist or reductionist. I think consciousness is like irreducible, insofar as like you can't reduce it to. So I think there is something like special to the mind, which is why there will never be a like full blown science of consciousness or science of the mind in the same way there's science of quarks or science of atoms. So to some extent, we're just always going to be stuck in this messy world of subjectivity, but it's kind of
Hmm.
what makes life interesting in a way.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like if there's some utility to all of this philosophizing and psychologizing, then that's good. If it helps
right. And,
people.
and that what brings it full circle in terms of like this Blanchardian stuff and this AGP, and like why I talk about this is because I actually think the knowledge has pragmatic benefits. It's not just purely like, you know, interesting as intrinsic truth or whatever, but it has pragmatic benefits insofar as like in my own case, and also talking with other self-aware AGPs, this knowledge actually has impact on your life and the decisions that you make. Like self-knowledge is important. So
Yeah.
I think that's ultimately how we're gonna make any progress, is just, you know, more self-awareness. And if you want to safeguard against bad AGP behavior, self-awareness is a good start for most behavior change. You can't change a behavior unless you're aware you need to change the behavior. So
I couldn't agree more. I always say, like, the people out there, the poorly behaving trans women, they're not doing so because they know they're AGP. That's not what we're seeing here. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's because their AGP in society tells them that means they're a woman. Is why. What's dangerous about it all.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Ray.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
This was awesome.
I like feel like I could talk to you guys for like forever. We could definitely keep going for another several hours.
We would love to have you back.
Yeah, totally. Sure. Anytime, my schedule is wide open, so happy to be on. And I'm looking forward to seeing your YouTube channel grow, because I think this is like the cutting edge, in my opinion, of like where the gender discourse is happening, is on channels like this. So
that is very kind. Thank you. Yeah. All right. See you. Thanks, everybody.